back and we're recording. Hopefully you had a chance to refresh as we dig into our time with Dr. Lallier. We are so fortunate to have her with us. Before I introduce her, I just wanted to name that we did have a few questions or suggestions around Slido. And so Michelle and I are working through that to try to make it the most effective tool that we can. So we appreciate that and we are trying to work through that. I also had a question as to whether you would get some of these responses back later. And yes, that was the hope, is to collect some of this and pull all of our expertise into the room and then share it back out to you so that you can see what our colleagues would say and how they would approach things. Because one thing I've learned as I have coached myself or worked with coaches or done the coaching intensives is that it's great to hear other language that other coaches are using. And I know for myself, I get stuck in the same stems sometimes, which is great if they work for you, but sometimes it's nice to see what others are thinking too. So those will be shared. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Lallier, who will be doing our Q&A with us today. So Dr. Lallier holds a bachelor's in Spanish and secondary education from Macalester College and master's in deaf education from Gallaudet University, a master's in educational administration from California State University, a master's in human development and psychology from Harvard University, and an EDD in human development and psychology with a specialization in reading, language, and learning disabilities from Harvard. Her professional career began in St. Paul, Minnesota as a teacher at the elementary level, teaching both deaf and regular education students in grades K-6. She then served as the principal of a preschool and elementary program in Santa Fe, New Mexico. After earning her doctoral degree, she began teaching at the university level, first at Governor State University, and then most recently at Northern Illinois University. As a university professor, she's taught courses to grad students working towards their master's degree in reading, including courses in literacy leadership and literacy coaching. She has engaged in research to examine the relationship between literacy coaching and student achievement. In addition, Susan has provided ongoing professional development in the areas of literacy coaching to several school districts within the greater Chicago area. Her research and work with literacy coaches has led to the publication of 3 books about literacy coaching, 2 for the elementary literacy coaching and 1 for coaches at the secondary level. Since 2016, Dr. Lallier has worked with the MESA team to support Michigan's early literacy coaches in a variety of ways. She is a co-author of the Essential Coaching Practices for Elementary Literacy and the EduPass modules focused on those practices, a co-creator and facilitator of the Intensive Literacy Coaching Institutes, and a co-creator and facilitator of the courses titled Integrating the Coaching and Instructional Modules to Deliver Effective Professional Learning. The belief that instruction is only effective when it results in learner growth drives Susan's work with K-12 students, university students, teachers, administrators, and colleagues. And with that, we're going to hand it off to Susan for our Q&A.
Well, thank you, Heather. That was very nice of you to introduce me that way. I think that I have learned so much from all of the coaches here in Michigan, or there in Michigan. I'm here in Illinois. But I certainly have learned a lot from all of the work that I've done in Michigan about coaching, and hope to share some of those ideas with you today. Sorry that I don't look like Nell Duke, or I can't answer the questions as maybe Nell Duke might answer them, but you'll get a chance to hear her again, I think, in February. So today, as I was very appreciative of the way that people sent questions in about coaching, and I'm going to address them. But also, as Heather mentioned, there's so much expertise in this Zoom environment right now. So if I say something and it triggers an idea in your mind, like, oh, this was really effective when I did this, or maybe someone else would like to hear this question, if you could put it in the chat. Heather's going to monitor the chat, and maybe we'll stop at a few places so Heather can share some of the ideas that are there, or ask me a question about something that somebody said. So I'm going to just share my screen. So questions about literacy coaching. There are no easy answers. There's not a one size fit all, just like professional learning. There's not one answer for every question, but we'll look at some possible ways to address some of these questions. One of the first questions that came in was, what are your best tips and tricks for building a culture of coaching in a world of burned out teachers that are barely getting by? And how can we support principals, coaches, and reading specialists during this time? So there's a lot of talk about teacher burnout at around. And I do think that we want to be sympathetic about the challenges that teachers are facing. But also, I think that sometimes we get into the routine of being overly sympathetic, and that might even increase that burned out feeling on the part of teachers. So I think that it's really important to think of ways that we can encourage teachers to focus on what they have control over in their classrooms. And in line with those adult learning principles that we've been looking at, let's have that positive presupposition that teachers want to focus on their students' learning and what's most relevant to their students. And I think that that is true of teachers I work with, at least. So one of the things that you might want to focus on, because you know that they're interested in their students and what's challenging for your students. And earlier today in one of the breakout rooms, somebody was talking about the work we did last year on asset-based coaching. And I think that this is a good place to think about asset-based coaching when you're saying to teachers, well, what's one area of literacy learning where you see that your students are making good progress? So that they can shift out of being, oh, the students aren't doing this and aren't doing that. But what are they doing well? What are you thinking that they're doing well at? And it doesn't have to be in the area of, it could be in the area of literacy. And if they say, oh, I can't think of anything in literacy, well, how about in math or science, or in developing a culture of getting to know each other? What's one area that you see your students are making good progress in, and what's contributing to that, so that they can really start focusing on the positives in their room? And then there's probably many things that you would like your students to do better at, but what's one area of literacy learning where you wish your students were doing better? And sometimes this is a time where you might think of collectively all your students, if you're thinking of what you can do as a whole group instruction versus small group instruction. But what ideas have you been thinking about that might help them in this area? You want to have that, again, that presupposition that they've been thinking about their students, that they have ideas about what might work for their students, and that they can share those ideas with you. So what ideas have you been thinking about? Wow. Well, which of those ideas really resonates with you that you think might work best? And, well, here are some ways we could maybe work together around this aspect of literacy learning. And then again, you're giving ideas of ways that you can support, but you want to get it back to the teacher of, but this is your classroom, you are in control. Which ones seem most doable to you? So that focus on the fact that they're in control, that their students have positive things going for them, that there's one area that you really want to focus on, and how could we work together on this, giving teacher choice. So that's one thing that you can do to really focus the teacher on the positives when you talk about questions about students. You can also have questions about their own knowledge and skills. Sometimes the teachers are just overwhelmed by thinking, I have to do so much and I don't know enough about any of these things to do it well. So you have to go back to that basis of what are some good teacher assets. So again, you start with, What aspects of literacy instruction do
Well,
you currently
look at that.
feel confident and competent about? And I think that y- sometimes you have to encourage or light a little fire under that, like, well, when I've been in your classroom, I see that your students are really progressing in writing good introductions to their work, and your explanation of how to do that, your strategy work around that seem to be very effective. Or I think you should feel confident and competent about that. Um, so sometimes that you just have to point out some things for the teacher to kind of say, oh yeah, I'm doing some things right, and I'm feeling confident about this. um, then, like all of us, there's something we wish we knew more about or were more skilled at doing. I could probably list 10 things that I wish I knew more about in the area of literacy or in life itself, and I was more skilled at doing. And so, again, start small, keep it to one area, and then maybe help them think of ways that they could work on that area. Here are some ways we could work together. And then again, get back to which ones might be of interest to you. So you can focus on the teacher themselves or on the students, depending on what you know about that teacher. If they're really so intimately involved in what their students are doing, or if they're really feeling right now that it's the problem that I'm having right now is my own knowledge. And so if you know that teacher fairly well, you can decide which set of questions you might want to ask, and where your work might go. I think it's important to really talk to the principal about um, this feeling that teachers have. I'm sure most principals know that some of their teachers are feeling overwhelmed due to all the perceived expectations that um, they have. And I think, too, some of the expectations that teachers think are being placed on them are really just perceived expectations. And sometimes they aren't all, teachers don't have to do everything. So when you're talking to the principal, you might want to talk about the idea of, can we get across to teachers what are those top priorities? Let's review the KIP or the school improvement goals. And are those the goals you as a principal want to have the teachers think of as top instructional priorities? Or are there other things that you really have put across as top priorities? And now teachers are like saying, well, I have to do the school improvement goals, and I have to, the principal really wants to do this. And so how can um, you as a principal and I as a coach work with teachers to really make sure that we're on the same page in terms of those top instructional priorities? And then once we're on the same page, what can I as a coach do to provide some large group or small group or individual coaching around those priorities? So if you can narrow the field of priorities so teachers don't feel you can't have 20 priorities. You just can't have it. You can't have 10 priorities. What, as a principal, do you really want the teachers to think of in the school as school-wide top priorities? So I think the principal plays a really important role in this process. Heather, were there any things in the chat that needed to be added?
I agree. I agree.
Oh, okay.
We're right with you, Susan, and understand that these are powerful ways to support this. So
And I also just have found that sometimes teachers are really eager to get into something new and talk about something new. And if you're eager to do it with them, I think that's half of the battle, right? But on the other hand, somebody says, what is your advice for getting coaching to take hold with teachers who aren't required to work with you, and how these came from two different people. And how do we encourage reluctant teachers to engage in coaching? I usually use the term hesitant teachers, but whatever term you like to use, people who are not so sure that they want to participate in coaching. First of all, I think we want to look at this idea of being required to work with you. If, for example, you're required to work with all new teachers, either new teachers who are their first year teachers or they're new teachers in the building, the rest of the teachers start to get the idea that coaching is just for new teachers. And then they don't actively want to volunteer to participate. The other thing is, if you're required to work with a coach, you may be less enthusiastic about, by the principal or something. You may be less enthusiastic to do that work and not as fully engaged as we would like people to be. So I think that we want to talk about how we're selecting, or how teachers are selecting, the idea of engaging in coaching. And last year, Dr. David Hunt and I did a survey with the GLN representatives, and we did focus groups with those representatives and some coaching coordinators. And so the results of one of the questions on that survey was, how do you select the teachers who are going to be coached? And the number one answer was through volunteering. Another answer was that we work with a group who want to work on a similar goal. They also talked about how it sometimes happens in second and third grade, especially, that every second grade group of second graders who come in seem to have a gap in their learning about something related to a certain learning standard. And so we look at that and think about the teachers who are working at maybe at that second grade or third grade, and we work with them because they have a group of students who have a specific need. Sometimes there is professional learning brought in for a specific group of teachers, and then those teachers want to be able to move forward from that one-time professional learning session or two-time professional learning session into a coaching environment where they're going to have ongoing meetings in order to help them move some of the ideas from those professional learning sessions into their own practice. And then they did say that sometimes the principal does select who the coach is going to work with, but many of them put in parentheses, but that doesn't happen a lot. We didn't see in the focus groups or when we talked that there was a progression of how teachers are selected for coaching. But in the literature and across the nation, often we see this progression of when you are a new coach in a building, you do work with those who volunteer. And then as you get to know the teachers better, get to know the curricular resources better, understand the school goals better, that you work to more specific methods of selection. So you're working with teachers around certain curricular areas or students who have some specific needs, that kind of thing. And I think, again, that the role of the principal is key. And at the very beginning of the year, it's important that the principal say something like, this year, our coach is going to spend a lot of time working with our two new teachers who we're just thrilled to have in the building. The coach is also going to be working with the third grade team because their students have a need around this particular learning standard, but there's still time in the coach's schedule for those of you who want to work with a coach on things related to our school goals or some specific uh, interests that you have that where you think the coach can be supportive. And then the principal can turn the discussion over to the coach so the coach can talk about how people can contact the coach and what kinds of things the coach would be happy to work on. So I think that once again, that coach principal relationship is just so important. When we're talking about collaborating with hesitant teachers, one of the things that happens is if they hear about a successful collaborative experience that their peers have had with the coach, it can lead the way to their being less resistant or less hesitant to work with the coach, especially if that person who is talking about the successful collaborative experience is a pretty good colleague of theirs. So that's one way that if you can, at staff meetings, have a teacher or two talk about some of the experiences they've had to bring successful learning with their students or more knowledge of their own through coaching. I think that can actually open the door for hesitant teachers to want to take a little bit more of a risk. The other thing is that you can work at the grade level where there might be one or two teachers who have worked with you as a coach and one or two teachers who are hesitant. And just doing that grade level work and then asking those hesitant teachers, how could I support you in doing what we as a grade level have agreed to do, is another way to get in the door. Sometimes you have to just build credibility. They're hesitant because they don't know what you're like. They haven't seen you in a classroom. And so you can say to some of these hesitant teachers, we just are using this curricular resource, and I'm seeing that the students are having difficulty with this part throughout, it's a difficult part of the curriculum. And I'd just like to come in and try this strategy. Could I do that? Giving the teacher a chance to see you in action with students and talking through what you did with the teacher and showing your vulnerability by being in the classroom. And even those informal chats with teachers just about students or what's going on with their curriculum or with their students. Those informal chats can also help build that relationship so they're less hesitant. Heather, is there anything else that we need to talk about?
Sure, just naming that the role that the principal plays and that they are a bridge to teachers and often the missing link. And so appreciating the tips to keep that growing and growing that relationship and strengthening that. And then also thinking about when the principal presents coaching as a get to rather than the opportunity to have to, or as an opportunity rather than a have to or requirement. It makes a big difference in how the coaching is perceived. And then I do have a question. What would you recommend we do about principals requiring coaching of all staff? Thus asking coaches to report who they are coaching and around what topic.
I in terms of having coaching all staff, I think that there are ways using the layered approach that all teachers can receive some coaching throughout the year, but not the exact same amount of coaching. So sometimes teachers are going to receive coaching because the coach is doing a professional learning around something related to maybe the school-wide goal. And then the coach may be working more intently with grade levels around that school-wide goal before working with a few individual teachers in around that school-wide goal. So I think that yes, you can probably touch base with every teacher through coaching during the year, but you have to think about the level and the amount of coaching. And so it's not going to be possible to give every teacher the same amount of coaching, or if you do, it's not going to be enough time to really impact teachers. So I think you have to carefully think about that. And the second one was about required, something, Heather, about required.
It wasn't a question, it was just so, yeah, the first was a comment, just a general comment of when principals present it as an opportunity versus a must-do, you get a lot better feedback. And then the second one was the question about what you would recommend for when they're requiring all staff. So yeah, I'll read it one more time for you, but I think you got most of it. What would you
Okay.
recommend to do about principals requiring coaching of all staff? And then in addition, when they do that, they're then asking coaches to report who they are coaching around and what topic. So
So
by
I think
requiring
that, you know, I think the whole idea of the principal requiring everybody, I think the language is the principal is going to say everybody's deserves a coach and in some way will get coaching this year. That kind of thing. I think in terms of having the principal know who the coach is working with, it's inevitable probably that typically at those meetings, the coach might say, I'm working with a second grade team around this, and I'm working with a second grade teacher around this. Eventually, when you move into school-wide goal work, it's going to be very noticeable that the second grade team is working around the school-wide goal, and the principal knows who's on the second grade team. So I think the idea is that you're building a relationship with the teachers and with the principal, so you get to the point where they know the basic topic of coaching, but you're still not talking to the principal about, oh, and when I'm coaching this teacher, this is going so well, or this teacher needs a little bit more about this. So the topics of coaching are certainly something you want to share with the principal, but the specifics of individual coaching is something that you don't want to share with the principal. If the principal wants to know is about how coaching is going in a classroom, or how that teacher is doing an uptake of those coaching ideas, then it's the principal's job to go in and observe the teacher and talk to the teacher about, you know, what kinds of positive effects the teacher is having on the students and what areas the teacher might work on. That's the principal's job. So I think, again, it's good to know that the principal knows what kind of coaching is going on, but not the individual specifics of it. How do I know if I'm asking the right questions? I think Heather even used that issue, that particular phrase earlier today. And are there clues that you can look for? And I think that there are really the right questions are there aren't really right questions necessarily. I think you have to align your questions to the activity you're doing. For example, if you're having a goal setting conversation, the questions are around what are the explicit goals and explicit expectations for the work that you're going to do together. And we're going to talk a lot about that in our coaching coaching cycle pathways this afternoon, if you care to join us either this afternoon or in February or May. And there are also questions aligned to co-planning, like how can we use the gradual release of responsibility model as we support students moving toward independence? This gives you an opportunity to review that gradual release of responsibility model and to really focus in on that guided practice piece of the model, either the guided practice piece where the teacher's doing the guiding, or the guided practice piece where two students or a small group of students are working together and giving support to each other. So those aspects of of the gradual release of responsibility and co-planning are really important. And in modeling and observation, the questions really have to do with, as I'm modeling, what are you going to be looking for? What specific things have we been talking about that you want to see when I'm modeling? And also, if as a coach, am observing you, what are the things you want me to look for that will help you understand how the students are progressing in this particular area? So you have to align your questions, I think, to the activity. The other thing you want to do is really be an active listener to the teacher's wonderings, their questions, their concerns. And so as you go through your conversations with them, you can bring to mind some of those questions or wonderings that you've heard and go back to them and say, how did this part of our discussion address your concern about? And that enables them to say, oh, yes, you heard me. You heard me say I was concerned about this. And now that we've talked, I'm not concerned about it because I know this and this and this. Also, how did the resource we just looked at address some of the questions you had about this? So sometimes in your work with teachers, you do a lot of professional learning with sharing an article or sharing a handout of some kind. And you can then ask them, did this answer your question? How did this answer your question? So the teacher's reiterating the knowledge that they gained. Or how has our work addressed your wondering about this? And what are you still wondering about? Notice this use of how, so that the teacher is really explaining how their concerns have been allayed, how the resources really helped answer the question, how their wonderings have been answered or addressed, and as opposed to the word did. Because when you ask the word did, you're going to get a yes or a no answer. Oops, sorry. What suggestions do you have when you coach a teacher around a goal they've selected, when the coaching cycle is done, they abandon the changes? Oh, surprise, surprise. Happens all the time, right? We're done with the coaching cycle. I'm done with this. And so I think that there are different avenues of support that you can use. The first is that in your last end of cycle coaching conversation, you want to establish a plan of how the teacher is going to be continuing the work. So you can ask questions like, what parts of the instruction do you plan to continue? Perhaps you've been working with fluency with the teacher and the students, maybe through dyad reading and through listening to books on tape to build fluency. And so you say, well, do you plan to continue both of those strategies? Or did our assessment show that one was better than the other? Which of the strategies are you planning to do? Where are you going to fit that into the day? So how are you going to make sure that the students are still doing dyad reading or still listening to books on tape? How are you going to continue monitoring their progress when we're not doing it officially? It could be just through simple fluency progress, or they're going to use a benchmark, the next benchmark. And then you can set a date to check in with the teacher on how that plan is going. Make sure that the teacher has a copy of the plan. Hopefully you have summaries of all your conversations with the teachers, and that plan is just listed there in like 4 or 5 simple steps. The other thing is to go in and do some follow-up observations. Schedule a couple of times to go in and observe how the students are doing, and develop specific look-fors for those observations, so that, okay, when I come in and I'm just going to come in and see how that dyad reading is going and what is it that you would like me to look for as I watch the students engage in dyad reading. So are they, you can be looking to see if they're following the procedures that were established in the cycle. You can then talk about if you want to add a new strategy and what strategy might that be and how might you support them in that strategy. So making sure that the coach knows you're coming in to do some follow-up observations is often helpful. Follow-up conversations are somewhat less helpful at times, but if that's the only option you have, meet with the teacher to discuss how the students are doing in relation to the goal. It may remind the teacher that, oh yeah, we should be doing dyad reading or listening to tape more, or whatever it is. So, and it always helps if you're going to have a follow-up conversation to give the teacher a couple of reflective questions that they can think about before your meeting, so that it isn't just a meeting and the teacher has to think on the spot. I'm thinking, I'm just looking at the time. I'm supposed to be done by 11:15, right, Heather?
Yes, but if you go over, we have a couple minutes of wiggle room, as long as you're
Okay.
done by 11, I think 11:20.
Okay. Was there anything else that we needed to talk about in the previous ones about that we haven't talked about?
I do have one question, but I think if you keep going, it's not related to either of the
Okay.
questions you've done so far, so I'm holding it until the end. So
Okay.
if you asked a question I didn't share, I've got you, just not yet. I'm holding it.
Okay. Well, I want to talk a little bit about coaching logs to record coaching activities. And this person wants to know what coaching responsibilities should be logged besides coaching cycles. And there's a lot of data that could be logged. You have to decide what data is most important for your coaching group and how easy is it going to be to enter that data into the coaching log, and how you're going to use it. So typically, on most of the coaching logs that we're seeing, there's a time factor, time spent coaching, but also with individual teachers and at what grade level, the time spent coaching with teams of teachers, time spent providing professional learning sessions. There's also a listing usually of the coaching activities, and sometimes the connection of that activity to an essential coaching practice or connecting an activity to a school-wide goal. And most recently, I've seen a lot of the coaching logs say, was this activity connected to a planned coaching cycle? So that you can get an idea of how many coaching cycles are going on. Also, in many logs, they're recording the time spent on literacy leadership activities, such as school and district ISD curriculum meetings. And then on other activities, this takes a little bit more time, but is important. Things like professional learning, things like organizing assessment materials or ordering materials, and hopefully not, but oftentimes recording if you have to substitute for somebody else, because that takes so much time away from your coaching. We don't want that to be happening too much, if at all. So there's all this data that could be collected. I think the most important thing is if you collect this data, you have to use it in some way. You have to examine it. And it's just like assessment data with students. How are you going to let those assessment results drive your instruction? Well, in this case, how are you going to let this data that you collected about your time as a coach drive your future coaching goals? And so these are some of the questions that you might ask. How are you spending most of your time? If you find that you're spending most of your time large group professional learning, you want to move down into small group and individual coaching if you can, because that's where you get that intensive, sustained work with teachers that really impacts student learning. What grade levels am I spending most of my time? And are those the grade levels that we said I was supposed to be spending most of that time? Or does it correspond to the data about student needs? One of the things that oftentimes you can see if you look at your work with a teacher, if you can summarize if your log is able to say, okay, with this teacher, I have done this many things. If you see, I've done a lot of goal setting, I've done some co-planning, and I've done a ton of modeling, but I haven't done very much co-teaching or observing. How can I move into those things? Looking at the number of coaching cycles you're engaged in, and are there other opportunities to do that? And if you know there are opportunities that teachers want, then, but how do I have the time to do that? What things could be taken off of my plate? And that's where it's important to look at those other activities that you've listed. What could you eliminate or reduce? Are ISD superintendents consistent with the messaging of expectations, including coaching logs and accountability? And is logging coaching activities consistent across the state? When we did our GELN survey, at least 70% of the respondents said that they use some type of electronic coaching, and almost all of them had coaching time and coaching activities listed, but very few of them talked about how they used those results to drive instruction. I think that some of the members said that they purchased a commercial type of log, and then they had the people revise it to meet their needs. Some said they developed it, their IT department developed their own logs. We talked to them about having a statewide electronic coaching log, which we know is being developed that through MESA, and as an option that ISD superintendents could, principals or ISDs could use. And there's pros and cons to both. And they were able to talk about how having a statewide electronic coaching log would really help see, compare and contrast across the state what's going on. But they also said that they were worried about the logs not including all of the data that they wanted to have, and also that those ISDs who have had a coaching log for 3 or 4 years and are just getting their coaches really attuned into filling it out religiously and using them, were concerned about changing to a different log. So they did talk about the pros and cons of having a statewide coaching log, so consistency across the state. And they did talk about the problem of we have to make sure that we use the data that we're gathering. I got a lot of questions, and I just wanted to touch base on this about how can we effectively leverage the LETRS training across our state by utilizing coaching to ensure successful implementation of the knowledge and instructional routines within LETRS. And I think this isn't true just for LETRS, but it's true for any new professional learning that teachers are doing. How can you effectively take that professional learning and make sure that it moves from knowledge and skills into practice? So we want to make that move easily. I think one of the things you as a coach want to do is gather a little information from the teachers that you're supporting. Like, how did they move through the LETRS training if you don't know? Did they do it as a group, like some ISDs, some districts did? or did they do it in partnerships? Sometimes districts paid a stipend to work with another teacher in order to take the letters training. Some people did it on their own. It's just kind of important to know the context through which they did the training, because it helps you kind of think through how much discussion they might have had with other people and getting other ideas. You want to know if they tried out some of the strategies with students to in that bridge to practice piece, and how involved they were, so that you can know, yeah, they're really interested. They really tried some of them, so they'd probably be very interested in trying some more. I'd say that you want to start small. There's so much information that was provided in the letters training, and we know we don't have it all in our brains. You went through that training, most of you are going through it, and we don't have a letters brain, a section of our brain that just says this is all of our letter knowledge. And so you start small. Maybe it is something that you want to maybe confirm how the curricular resource they're using is aligned not only to the instructional practices and the learning standards, but to letters. So as you're going through the curricular resource, you can say, remember in letters, they use this strategy, or this is the thinking that was presented in letters. So just to confirm and reinforce some of the knowledge that they learned, but may not be in the forefront of their mind at the moment. There are also some gaps in curricular resources that we adopt. Just by nature, one curricular resource can't solve everything. So it could be that some of the strategies from letters training could be used to fill in those gaps, just like some of the strategies from the essential practice modules could be used to fill in some of those gaps. So helping the teachers remember, oh, this is an area we're working on. And do you remember in letters, they had these 3 different strategies that you could choose when you're working on this area? And which 1 or 2 do we think might work with our students? And also you can use that letters knowledge when you're examining new curricular resources, to see how well aligned it is with the knowledge from the essential practices, the learning standards, and what they learned in training, and the strategies from all of those things. So there's 3 possible ways that you can move from knowledge to practice. I want to then say that I received several questions about instruction, but I would prefer that Dr. Duke answer those, even though I might have some ideas. I think she has more of the research right at her fingertips. So in February, these are some of the things that I'll pass on to Nell to talk about. So we'll make sure that those questions get answered. But one of the questions that I did want to answer in relation to instruction has to do with this question about bookworms. And the reason, not that we advocate the use of bookworms, but there are a lot of districts and that are using bookworms and may have this same question. So I did want to address this. I'm mentoring coaches who are working in districts that use bookworms right now, and have dealt with this issue. But the question is, they're not able to solidly decode the shared reading text when reading with a partner. So the teachers want to know if they should add more scaffolds, if they should use more echo or choral reading, or if they should switch to decodable books until the students have a more solid decoding foundation. And while I could have some ideas, I thought that I would ask Ashley Karkanen from Menominee ISD to respond to it, because she's not only a literacy coach who's using bookworms, but she is a community coach for the Bookworms organization and answers these kinds of questions regularly in her monthly meetings with coaches. So I'm going to stop sharing and ask Ashley if she would answer this question. I know that she's here somewhere.
I'm here. Good
Ah,
morning.
good morning.
Um, this is a common question, and first grade is really an interesting time for teachers who are using bookworms, especially if it's your first year. So one of the places that I would always encourage people to check out is in your manual with the orange cover, or if you're accessing that online from the Open Up Resources website. There's a part on the top when you access all the lessons over in the right-hand corner that says teacher resources, or it says resources, and there's a spot in there for the teacher resource manual. And in there, you have to click down for the drop downs, but there's a part that says first grade shared reading, understanding first grade shared reading. And in that, there's a subsection called ensuring successful implementation. And I'm sorry, it's right underneath that, supporting students who need additional scaffolds. And so right away in that section, it talks about for everything in shared reading in first grade is new for everybody because it's so much different than what the kids had in kindergarten. And so some of the things that you'll want to consider are, yes, that you can utilize and leverage echo reading and choral reading as much as you need to for the students. You know that in first grade, students aren't going to have the reading stamina. Many of them don't have the foundational skills. You'll notice when they are in the DI blocks that some of them are not yet to a first grade level of the skills that you're working on. And so Dr. Walpole really encourages specific goals. So setting goals for students within the room, like having them track the print and saying we want them to track print with their finger for 3 minutes, you know, in the initial read. And then every day or each week you keep upping the ante is how she refers to it, so that kids are making progress toward a goal. You'll notice at the beginning of first grade, it's not really that kids are doing partner reading right away. You're doing that echo read. You'll want to try to make meaningful partnerships with students, but some of those students you'll know really are not able to do that yet. And that's why you're asking this question. So a teacher should definitely be a partner to some of those students where you would be able to support them in whatever ways that those students need. So the things that I encourage the teachers that I work with, some of the students may just need another choral read where they are just still working on tracking print. Like each word is a spot where you move your finger. Some of the students may be able to just do a second read where it's a full echo. And one of the things Dr. Walpole came to our district and did a training last year, she clarified, which once again, I stood corrected, but what she really means when she says to echo in this structure is that you would exhaust the whole page, not just a line or a paragraph, that you would read it to them, and then you're going to read it a second time, and you're still going to lead them chorally in the echo as the guide, so that they cannot just memorize one sentence and say it back without having to actually look at the print. So even though the kids don't have the stamina and don't know it, you're still going to reread the whole page. And I know in these books, sometimes the whole page is only a few sentences, but as the year goes on, you're actually reading the whole page, and then doing the echo is actually a choral with you still reading and them following along. Finally, you can have students who have multiple different instructional needs in that same group. So we've had students who you know, maybe they have an IEP and their reading goals are to track print, while we have other kids who are working on their decoding. And so you can have a student there who's working to track print while the other students are doing the reading or the echo read. Some things you have to remember in the partner reading with students is that when they get to that point, is that they don't have to change. It doesn't have to be partner A reads and then partner B reads. You're the teacher. You can decide that you read with them or that they do a second choral read together. But what it does say for sure, I mean, there's a lot of choice there for the teacher, but what it does say in the manual at the end of that section, that the teacher definitely should be considered as a partner where you can provide whatever you need for that second time. Another thing is if you have other adults in the room, support staff, title aides, classroom aides, parallel teaching is a great thing. So having those kids for the initial read in a smaller group so that you can do that choral with them and hear them and support them the first time and then do that again the second time is a great thing. But what it says in the last paragraph there is, What our strategies for supporting students have in common is that they ask teachers to consider how a student who needs additional support can still participate as fully as possible. We don't substitute a different, easier text. We don't change the pacing. We don't eliminate the 2 readings. We don't remove students to a different location. We find a way for all students to participate. So even if they cannot read the text, they can listen, they can track, they can echo you back, and all of those things are appropriate. For developing the students' foundational skills, you're 100% right. Using decodable text for them to practice what they're learning in their DI group is a great thing to do. In other times of the day, the self-selected reading and so on. But not swapping it out during that instructional time and shared reading, because it's for more than just decoding. You're building a lot more other skills at that time as well.
So thank you, Ashley, for a really succinct but full explanation of that question. And I think that, Heather, that's the kind of final question that was in the group.
Yeah, thank you so much to both of you for sharing. Susan, there was one more question if you feel like it's something that we could answer succinctly if and it's, what do we do when a teacher just wants you to tell them the answer? Just tell me, Susan, what to do. What do you do?
I think a lot of it depends on who the teacher is, but I've had brand new teachers say to me, just tell me what to do. And typically I say, let's look at these 2 things that research shows works. And it doesn't matter which one you choose, because both of them should be successful with your students. So which one do you feel is something that you can implement right now with my support? And let's do that. I think that you don't want teachers to become dependent on you. So you always want to give them choices and have them make the choices, if at all, and have them make the final decision, if at all possible. And sometimes if they're just frustrated, sometimes it's like, I've never done this before. It's a brand new thing. I really don't know what to do. Sometimes you just say, okay, so what I hear you saying, you don't say that, but okay, with your students, this is what I would do. But I seldom do that. I really try to give them 2 good options and not 5. With some teachers, you can give them several options, but with people that frustrated, just give them 2 that are shown to work and have them choose one.
So limited choices while still giving them some voice. Thank you for that, Susan. And thank you for taking the time for all of those questions. You gave us a lot to think about, a lot to consider, and to move forward with. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to move it over to Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lallier. That was a great conversation. And I think a lot of those questions are questions we've all explored within our ISDs and with our coaches. We had intended, always best intentions, to do a breakout. But what I'm going to share is just these sentence stems. If your team is having lunch together, this could be something that you could kind of mull over, during lunch, is just think through these sentence stems in relation to what you learned today and some of the things that maybe have heightened your thinking about working with your teachers and your context. The slides are also linked in the agenda, so you can pull them back up and kind of look back through it and just maybe have a lunchtime conversation that would expand on this learning.